just to give you a sense of what I was trying to do with this, one of the things that had always frustrated me over the years about seeing museums about the Shakers, Kentucky or otherwise, in art museums, was that they tended really almost exclusively to focus on the furniture, which is great, which is beautiful, but they never really captured the whole range of what I like to call the creative endeavors of the Shakers. So working with Tommy and working with the wonderful staff at Pleasant Hill, we took a more holistic approach. And you'll see that today as we move across all kinds of media and Shaker enterprises. And in the case of the Shaker enterprises, some of the material culture that was left behind from those. And I have to say, I truly could not have done this without Tommy and his patience and his expertise. I'm always looking for an excuse to get out of town and drive down to South Union because it's a beautiful place, a beautiful drive, and to see Tommy again and the wonderful staff there. So, I mean, one of the things that we sort of start out with the exhibition that I think are certainly were in the era, one of the defining characteristics of the Shakers, Kentucky or otherwise, was their headwear, whether it was the bonnets or the men's hats. And the exhibition was a great chance to borrow this wonderful hat stretcher from the Western Reserve Historical Society up in Cleveland, which has an amazing Shaker object in our archival collection. And Tommy, as I recall, the hat stretcher has a South Union connection too, right?
I believe so. It's definitely got a Kentucky connection to it. And we at both villages made hats for sale and of course for the men to wear in the village. The hat industry wasn't quite as popular as the bonnet industry because the men's hats were so distinctive and wide brimmed that they really kind of identified Shaker men. However, the bonnets were more useful and they were sold in great numbers throughout the South, especially. So our bonnet industry, and I believe Pleasant Hills as well, was very, very lucrative for the Shakers.
Why don't we take a look at Pleasant Hill furniture? Starting with a selection of chairs, including a child's chair, which, believe it or not, is the only piece of Kentucky Shaker material culture in the Speeds collection. I purchased that from our friend Andy Anderson last summer. So great to have it. But you know, I think as we'll see, there are obviously differences between the Pleasant Hill chair-making tradition and that at South Union. And Tommy, I'll turn it over to you for your thoughts here on the Pleasant Hill examples.
Look, obviously, Shaker chairs are one of the most iconic forms that we find in any Shaker village. And the Southern chairs relate pretty closely to what you find in the Northeast, although the stock is a little bit thicker here. You know, there are differences in the finial shapes and differences in the seat material. Pleasant Hill chairs and rocking chairs, armed rockers, are pretty devoid of any kind of ornamentation at all. And we'll see in a second that South Union is not. And it's a theme that sort of resonates. Pleasant Hill stuck to the simplicity for the most part, and South Union did not. So you see these very beautifully formed, pared down straight chairs and these armed rockers too. I'll tell you, the little chair that you have hanging on the wall is quite a prize because I don't think there are but maybe one more known to exist from Pleasant Hill, unless somebody's hiding one out there that I don't know about. It's very, very rare for you to have that. The final chair you have there, that's the tall chair. These have become to be known as weaver's chairs, although they were probably used for a variety of things. And just like at South Union, the weaver's chairs, for some reason, do not relate to the other chairs. The finials are different, the back slats are different, and it does make you wonder if they were brought in or made somewhere else, or just somebody who had a different idea about chair design. But it's pretty across the board in both villages.
Yeah, I wanted to include this because Pleasant Hill has what I think 3 of these that you know, my understanding and their best understanding from their records were actually still on site in the 60s at Pleasant Hill when it became the start of the museum. And yeah, they're real simple. I don't know. I just suspect that they, as Tommy mentioned, that they came from someplace else and found their way in, but I guess you never know. To go back to the child's chair, just the provenance on this, which will make everyone cringe, because they didn't get there first, is that came out of a yard sale in Lexington. I think it was a little while ago, and eventually found its way into Andy Anderson's hands. We'll look at a great Pleasant Hill table and early blanket chest. I mean, I don't think one would ever mistake the table as probably not being from Pleasant Hill. The blanket chest, though, is another question. You know, classic form. I think the legs are a little bit of a giveaway. But Tommy, what are your thoughts with the blanket chest here, particularly that leg profile and how that relates to other things?
You know, the blanket chests at Pleasant Hill, there are a great number of them. It's funny how certain forms show up in collections in great numbers. For instance, we have lots of child's chairs at South Union, but we have only one footed blanket chest at South Union, and Pleasant Hill has probably at least 8 or more. Now, the difficulty comes in that none of them are exactly alike, but this one with this foot does relate to a bureau in the collection, and it is a foot turning that you see in other places in Kentucky furniture. Now, another thing that you see here are these tiny little pulls. And again, don't know how to explain this, but Pleasant Hill seemed to prefer these tiny pulls, and South Union on their case furniture employed these massive knobs, just big mushroom knobs. And so it's very easy to see a difference in design sensibility between the two. There's no delicacy in the ones at South Union, but these are gorgeous here.
Yeah, and just to return to the table next to the blanket chest, as I said, I don't think you would not, this wouldn't be mistaken for probably anything other than Pleasant Hill. But I think, as we'll see, Tommy, with some of the South Union table forms, the Pleasant Hill Shakers, at least in terms of this table form, are pretty true, at least to their principles of simplicity and design.
Yes. So this table dates from probably 1840s, 1850s, and there are others in the collection, some that are actually dated from that same time period, with this very simple cylindrical leg. And when the square post turns into the cylindrical leg, there is no transition whatsoever. Just a very sharp turning from square into round there. You never see that at South Union, which we will see. So the interesting thing about this table is this is made during a period of what they call Mother Ann's work. And a lot of the Shaker villages were kind of going back during this period in the 1840s and 50s to more simpler times as far as the way they were designing their built environment and their furniture. Pleasant Hill seemed to adhere to that in a very Kentucky way, a very kind of a substantial, chunky way. But we will see in just a minute that South Union definitely did not. So a great variation in the way people are looking at what a Shaker table should look like in the 1850s, just 130 miles apart.
And then the big case piece, probably the most famous, or at least most published piece of Pleasant Hill furniture, the chest of drawers with a press on top. So this has some inscriptions in it that date to the 1870s, but Tommy and I were talking before we started today, just that at least for the top part of this, it seems so much earlier. What do you think, Tommy?
Yeah, I definitely think it's earlier. It is actually my absolute favorite piece from Pleasant Hill. The top and the bottom may or may not have been made together. which we find very, very commonly in both Kentucky villages. We, look for pieces that were made at the same time today when we're collecting antiques and eschew any kind of married piece. But the problem is the Shakers were making presses to be moved about, and they actually document that. Now this one looks pretty darn good together, so it may have been, but the base, the 4-drawer base, has again the very, very plain cylindrical leg, and then those wonderful doors on the top that are flat panel with no ornamentation whatsoever. Rails and stiles are just very, very plain, and that gorgeous cove molding on the top.
Yeah. I love the cornice treatment too, with the applied moldings as well.
At South Union, there is a form of a linen press that is very similar to this, but all of ours are much more diminutive, and they are a 1-drawer base with a 2-door cupboard or press on top. We have 6 of those. Not a one of them are exactly alike, but they all have very characteristic South Union turnings and construction techniques. But that linen press form at South Union was like a shrunken version of what you are seeing right here. As far as I know, this is the only one I've seen from Pleasant Hill, but it is indeed a beauty. It's one of the best pieces in the collection there.
Yeah, and one of my favorites next is the Pleasant Hill candle stand. Again, with an Andy Anderson provenance. I really love the way Pleasant Hill handled it's the same idea as so many other candle stands of this period, but the way they treated the turning of the vase on the stem, or as they called it. And then this edge to this top that starts out fairly thick, but then just tapers to this beautifully thin, precise top. And correct me if I'm wrong, Tommy, if I flip this over, I will see a iron spider down here, whereas at South Union, they were using staples. Is that correct?
Yes, there should be an iron plate that is cut to fit the bottom of that candle stand that holds those legs, those very precarious little legs in place. And it's a thing unique to Pleasant Hill. It was a great idea. We use, like you say, iron staples to kind of pull ours together. And that's something you see almost exclusively at South Union. Now, the great thing about that candle stand is that there are several of those at Pleasant Hill that seem to be out of just the pattern book that they were making. And what makes even more sense is those beautiful little templates that you have hanging on the wall that were helping those craftsmen make those candle stands, those great cabriole legs. And what treasures those are as well for something like that to have survived.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean that's the ultimate furniture geek survival is when you find templates like that. And look, when I was putting pieces together to include in the exhibition, I knew I wanted to include those. And looking at their records, those literally were found in the attic of one of the buildings in the 1960s. Thank goodness no one had thrown them in the fireplace as kindling. So another chest of drawers and press. This one a bit later than the first. The drawer actually signed by Stephen Boisseau, and I'll talk a little about Stephen's life in a minute, but a cabinet maker, a longtime shaker at Pleasant Hill, served in various leadership roles too. And the documentation there states that Stephen made a press a couple of years later after the chest of drawers, which dates to 1857. And it was to go on, as I recall, I think it was the nurse's room, to put the press on top of an existing bureau. So I think it's a pretty reasonable assumption that the press we see here was also Boisseau's work. Tommy, my limited knowledge of South Union, I know that they were doing this marriage of pieces too as suited them. Are there, what does this slightly later period say to you about Pleasant Hill relative to maybe South Union?
Well, there's still the press itself is still very pared down and very simple, flat panel doors with rails and stiles that are again very plain, and just a bit of a crown molding there. The difference in this piece too is the fact that these legs do have a tad of ornamentation on them, something you don't see as much during this period, but it does relate to other things that you see in that collection.
Yeah, and in working on this exhibition, one of the things I enjoyed most was literally getting to know some of the members of these South Union and Pleasant Hill based on the records. And I would have loved to have met Stephen Boisseau. He was born in Louisiana, he and his brother, Justin, born in Louisiana to French immigrant parents. He and his brother, as teenagers, found their way to Pleasant Hill. It's unclear exactly how they got there. Their father clearly did not want them to be there and came at one point from Louisiana and, you know, carted them off, although both of the brothers ended up leaving the father again and going back. So just one of those great stories of the lives of the Shakers and how diverse some of their backgrounds were. You know, one of my favorite things that pops up in the Pleasant Hill records about Boisseau, Stephen, is that another brother of his, Eugene, apparently sent an alligator to Stephen at Pleasant Hill. Now it's unclear whether it was alive or dead, but there's this great notation in the Pleasant Hill records when this happened, saying, "We want no such beast here." And it's that kind of storytelling that has survived in the records, and the ability to put the written record with the people and the objects is what I loved about working on this exhibition. But I think what makes the Shakers such an important part of American, you know, social history, religious history, and material culture. So, well, why don't we go look at South Union furniture? We'll cross the gallery. And Tommy, we can start with chairs. We have several different finials going on here. Maybe we start down at the more typical one that you see here on the side chair and the rocker.
Yes, South Union has at least 5 well-documented finials that most of the chairs, you know, fit into those categories. This one is the most common of the early chairs, and it's been termed an egg in an egg cup type finial. So you see on those finials also scribe lines, usually through the middle of that egg.
Yeah, right.
These are some of the unnecessary things that South Union craftsmen did. Just these tiny pieces of ornamentation. You see them throughout that rocker, especially underneath the flat arm is again a pear-shaped turning that has scribe lines. You also see on that chair specifically the wonderful seating material, which is split oak, white oak.
Yeah.
The Shakers usually painted either a bittersweet color, or often we find it a black as well. That one is almost completely intact. That chair came directly from the farm manager's family who had worked for the Shakers and had never been touched or refinished. So it's a real treasure. Unlike Pleasant Hill, where you find the cloth listing or tape that we'll talk about here in a bit, you never see that at South Union. South Union also has very tall, widely arched back slats, and most of the time straight across the bottom.
Yeah. And here's, you'd mentioned a South Union loom chair. Here's one with, I mean, I love the finials on this, like inverted acorns or something.
Yes, it's again, just like the Pleasant Hill loom chairs, a little bit different. They don't really fit into the category. That chair has fantastic provenance. It was given to us about 3 years ago by a woman whose grandfather used it as a high chair in the early part of the century. It was given to him by the Shakers because his father ran their store. So it had been in that family ever since probably about 1910 and was gifted to us just a few years ago. So wonderful provenance. It was at the Village, but again, we don't know if the Shakers actually made it or not.
Yeah, and then we have this final chair with these sort of drum-like finials. So are you thinking that, is there any sort of chronology to these different finials, Tommy, or are they probably overlapping?
I think they're overlapping, and you can look at the other characteristics and match those chairs up into even closer categories. So I think that people were taking a little bit of artistic license with that finial. Whoever was turning that, maybe it was trying something different. There are maybe only 6 of those barrel-shaped finial chairs that I know of, while there are probably 30 of the ones with the egg and the egg cup. So it may have just been someone's whim in the Turner's shop.
Yeah. Well, we'll move on to probably the jaw dropper of all South Union pieces, past this beautiful blanket, by the way, which we could all probably use today. Just the amazing food safe. I think if you had to pick one piece of surviving Kentucky Shaker furniture that pointed out how different the Kentucky Shakers were, it'd probably be this one, wouldn't it, Tommy?
I think so. And I don't know of another well-documented pie safe or food safe in a Shaker collection. And again, there may be some out there I'm not aware of, but this piece is made just like our built-in furniture. There are other freestanding pieces in private collections that are just like this. In fact, there's one that is in poplar, the same scale, and in original yellow paint that's still in a private collection. This food safe was used in the center house at South Union, and when the Shakers left there and had their auction in 1922, this piece did not sell. It stayed in the center house for many, many years, and was given to our museum in the early 1960s by the man that bought the property from the Shakers. It's interesting that this piece was in the center house cellar in 1939, way after the Shakers were gone. It was down there just being stored by the new owner. And the Index of American Design folks who were going across Kentucky looking for great things to document, this is one of the pieces that they rendered. And they rendered it in its original paint, there it is, which was blue with red tins. So I know we love walnut and cherry today, but the Shakers had no qualms at all about covering walnut or cherry, or especially poplar, with brilliant, brilliant color that we continue to find on South Union pieces.
All right, well, we can turn our attention to sewing desks. Again, I think an iconic South Union form. Again, one of my favorites too, because you sort of see echoes of worldly furniture. I love the detail of the serpentine treatment of the front of the top, which was practical too, because you could lean into it that way. But yeah, I love these.
Yes, and you might think, well, my goodness, that's such a unique piece. But a few years ago, we found a duplicate that had great South Union history too. So these may have been made for Eldresses. I don't know, because there are only 2 that have shown up, but they may have been made for lots of people at the Village. Not only does it have that great utility drawer there that holds a lot of stuff, underneath that drawer is a pull-out that gives you an additional surface to work on. And then that wonderful drawer on the top, which lifts out, and that's where you keep your needles and your thread. And there's a tiny button there that holds that thing in place, and then it slips right back down into the top. Wonderful South Union ingenuity there. Now, we do have other sewing desks similar to this in scale, but not like this. There are at least 4 others.
And I'm so sorry to interrupt one more time, but just in case you want to see the tour the whole time, if you already don't have it on there, if you right click on Scott's screen, you'll be able to see Scott's screen the whole time, no matter if Tommy's talking or anybody else is talking. So just FYI, so sorry to interrupt again.
Well, a great candle stand next to the sewing desk. I'll let you talk about this, Tommy, because it also has a nice functional provenance to it based on its inscription.
Yes, and this is a form at South Union that we see very, very often. So we have lots of candle stands, and they all pretty much look the same with this pear-shaped vase and these cabriole legs. You will notice that we do not have that beautiful little taper on the end of our tops, like Scott mentioned on the Pleasant Hill. It's just a complete sharp edge there. So there's no taper at all. The thing that makes this one unique is its height. It's much taller than most candle stands, and underneath the top is written meeting room stand. So this could have been used in one of the dwelling house meeting rooms, or in the meeting house, probably more like a lectern, a place to stand behind and read, because it's just the perfect height for that. Now that's just our thought, but it does have that great inscription on the bottom.
And probably my favorite piece in the whole personally in the whole exhibition is this great side table, because I love the legs, but also that if you think shaker, this is probably not what you think of, right, Tommy?
No. And so if you can remember that Pleasant Hill table we looked at across the hall a minute ago with those plain cylindrical legs, this was made in the same period at South Union. So this is how South Union reacted to Mother Ann's work of the 1840s. Completely different way of looking at things. This table, if you had looked at this by itself, you might think, oh my gosh, there are so many worldly tables like this. But we have at least 10 tables at South Union, and just acquired another one 2 weeks ago that have the same leg turning. The great thing about this table too is we know exactly where it sat in the center house. It was taken by the farm manager's family in 1922. It sat between the doors in the center house dining room under the clock, and we also have the clock. And we think it might have been used to hold linens or silverware, flatware, because the drawers are very deep, but very they're deep as far as the width, but they're very shallow, so they wouldn't hold much as far as anything but something flat. It's in cherry, and that is, believe it or not, a one board top that you see there.
And last but not least, great South Union chest of drawers with a wonderful old surface on it.
Yes, and this also came from that same farm manager's family, and in the early 1990s, I remember going to their house and pulling their clothes out of it. They still had clothes stored in it, and it was a very, very exciting day to be able to take this and bring it back to South Union. This piece, it dates from the 1850s. There are at least 7 of these known to exist with the same construction techniques and this wonderful pear-shaped foot that you find often at South Union. That does have a little bit of ornamentation on it too, some scribe lines, just that little added extra something. We just acquired another chest of drawers, our bureau similar to this 2 weekends ago, and it has a different leg turning, but its construction techniques are just like what you find here. So always learning something new from our furniture.
Yep. Well, why don't we migrate? We talked about the woven seats on the South Union pieces. So why don't we'll swing around and take a look at a great basket from South Union.
Yeah.
Beautiful. It's probably a little hard to see on screen, but it has just beautiful coloration. And Tommy, yeah, tell us a little bit about this color choice and how it was used at South Union.
Well, I was going to say, Mary Ann Ramsey knows about these wonderful baskets too. We've talked about these, and we have at least 12 of these baskets at South Union. There are a few at Pleasant Hill too. And I don't know if both villages were making them. They are identical in construction, and they are unique to Kentucky Shakers. when Martha Weatherby was doing her shaker basket book several years ago, she kind of found out about us late in the game. And most of that book is about Eastern baskets, but she was thrilled to see this tradition that she did not know about. So these baskets were made on molds, big wooden molds, and you always find them in rectangular or square shapes. And they're white oak, and they appear to be the same material, the same weave that you find in our chair seats. And we've had basket makers look at these in the past year or so that swear the same person who was making these baskets were also putting these seats in the chairs. They're also using the same color on it. It's a bittersweet paint. And all of our paints, by the way, that have been analyzed by Susan Buck are of linseed oil based with ground pigments. So whatever they're using on the furniture, they're using the same thing on the architectural elements and on these baskets as well. Some of these baskets we have markings on them that tell us they were being used at the North family or at the trustee's office, which makes them even more wonderful. So you're looking at a true Kentucky only shaker tradition in those fabulous baskets.
All right, we'll take a little detour here from things made out of wood to things made out of textile materials. When we were looking at the Pleasant Hill chairs, one of them still retains its original woven wool webbing, what they called lists at the community. And I don't know, I love these things. I think that first, the work that it takes to process wool to get it to the point where you can weave it in, dye it and weave it into something like this. And they were making these by at least 1846, if I'm not mistaken, at Pleasant Hill. But just this, shaker simplicity, I think, has become a horrible commercial stereotype now. But if you look at the seat tapes and the way they were using them, interchanging different colors, shows, again, as we saw with that bittersweet basket, a flair for color, if nothing else, a great sense of color and how to use it.
Yeah.
And Tommy, you have no evidence of these being woven down at South Union. Any evidence that South Union was getting any of this material from Pleasant Hill?
Well, we've never seen it in any chair in our collection or that we've seen in private collections. Now, obviously, you're going to find chairs that have newer seats, replaced seats. So, it could have been there and nobody just wanted to retain it, but no evidence at all in our manuscript material. But you certainly see a lot of white oak.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of textiles, move on to this wonderful spinning wheel. What museum exhibition of American furniture is complete without a spinning wheel? But this one is the real deal, right, Tommy?
It is, and it's the only real deal. So of all of the spinning wheels that were once at South Union in their spin shops, that is the only one that has survived. And I think Pleasant Hill only has a couple actually that are well documented there. So what happened at South Union was early on, they bought mechanized equipment. They bought spinning jennies. And they had really no need for these great wheels after that. So how this one survived, I don't know. But I'll tell you a story about this very spinning wheel. Our original founder, Mrs. Curry Hall, for some reason gave this to her daughter-in-law. And that daughter-in-law showed it to me in the late 1990s at her home. I got to see some other shaker things that she had. Of course, we wanted to acquire it for the museum, and she said, no, you won't have these things. They're going to stay with me. Well, I took pictures of it, and lo and behold, about 5 years ago, I noticed a spinning wheel in a tag sale, and her name was attached to this tag sale. There it was. So I compared it with the pictures I had made in the late 1990s, and we were able to buy this spinning wheel for $175 in this tag sale. And again, it's the only one documented from South Union. So to us, it's a treasure. To other people, it may be one of thousands of spinning wheels you see in museums, but to us, it's our only example.
Yep. Well, we'll take just a brief stop. One of the things I was fascinated by that I knew about, but really hadn't spent much time researching, others certainly have, is the production of silk at both South Union and Pleasant Hill, which in the earlier period, Tommy can correct me if I'm wrong, you know, that these two southern communities were the most successful at production of silk. I think later in the 19th century, some of the eastern communities took it on, but clearly they were dealing with climate issues. It's much warmer here, but just I don't like bugs personally, so I can only imagine, you know, the Shaker sisters who are so devoted to coaxing along these silkworms and then, you know, getting their cocoons and turning it into these absolutely beautiful textiles, particularly the colors. Again, the color is amazing.
You know, both Kentucky villages from the 1830s up until the 1870s, even early 80s, were producing silk. And I think if you would ask the Shakers today, they would agree that it was not tremendously successful for them, but the sisters absolutely loved it, and they were not willing to give up that industry. They wore this silk. These kerchiefs were worn around their shoulders, and you see late 19th century pictures with the Shaker women wearing these when they dressed up. These were not worn for everyday apparel. And then the sisters up in the Northeast and in New York and New England, they loved this silk too. So we were sending bolts of cloth, silk thread to them. We gave gifts of silk handkerchiefs to the sisters and the brothers at Canterbury one year, and they really liked this product. We have seen newspaper ads in Cincinnati, for instance, where the Shakers are trying to sell silk thread and silk cloth, but it was so expensive to produce, so time consuming, that they really never made a huge profit on this. But again, if you do something you love, you're going to continue to do it. And the sisters loved this industry. And Scott, you're right. They talk about hearing the munching of the silkworms on those mulberry leaves. It was an audible thing in those buildings that they built for to house all those silkworms. So it very unique in early.
Yeah, and you know, the romantic part of me wonders if there wasn't, you know, a certain spiritual dimension to it too, the idea of, you know, life and death and all of that going on too. But I would not be one of those who would practice that. I wouldn't want anything to do with them.
Colors are vivid and beautiful. And again, I talk about how the Shakers were not drab and colorless. I'm telling you, there are some pinks that are just as vivid today as they were in 1860 or 70 when they were being made.
Yeah. Well, and the Shakers, now we turn to some of the books of songs of faith. Audibly, the Shakers were colorful too. I mean, this legacy of music writing, which speaks to me, having come from a family of musicians. So glad to be able to include some of this manuscript material. And if you were here visiting us, you'd also hear in the background, I've turned it down, some Kentucky Shaker hymns being sung by, among others, Tommy himself. So Tommy, tell us just a little bit about what it's like to, as a musician, to perform these relative to, say, you know, more standard sorts of Methodist or Baptist hymns.
Well, you know, this is such a rich tradition in Kentucky too. There are at least, I think, 12 or 14 manuscript hymnals from South Union that have survived. About half of that number, I think, or maybe a little more from Pleasant Hill. And the Shakers' music was tremendously important to them in their worship, but it was also important to them in their daily life. They sang while they worked. If they were doing a husking bee or working in the fields, they often sang. When visitors came, they would compose a song for that visitor. So when they were descending from their carriage, they're being serenaded, just like a musical. And then often when they leave, another song was being written, a farewell song to send them on their merry way. So music was just a big part of their life. So in these manuscript hymnals, it's like code that has definitely been decoded. It's notation by letters instead of notes, and it is just fabulous to be able to look at this music and pull melody out of these hymn books that probably hasn't been sung for 150 years or more. We don't do this as much at South Union now. We just don't have the amount of singers we did at one point. And I know at Pleasant Hill, it's still a great tradition there. But yeah, it's something really special to be able to hear a melody that the Shakers and had written so many years ago, and that people have just more or less forgotten. And there are literally thousands of them. So there is enough research material there for a musician for the rest of their life.
All right, we'll make one more stop and then answer some questions. One of the things that I knew literally zero about before I started in on this was the production of fruit preserves at South Union and Pleasant Hill. I mean, I knew it happened, but I didn't really know anything of the detail. But this, along with garden seed production, I mean, these were big agriculturally based businesses. And just to give you a statistic, in 1858, the Pleasant Hill Shakers in 1 year produced over 62,000 pounds of fruit preserves. I mean, can you imagine that? And then we have this wonderful device here, a fruit slicing bench from Pleasant Hill, signed by Alexander Milligan, who is a cabinet maker there and sort of a handyman too, associated with some of the other furniture from the community. And Tommy, if I remember correctly, South Union was producing preserves at sort of the same sort of mass production level.
In about 14 varieties, and they were made certainly, or most certainly, for the southern market. We sold a lot of preserves in New Orleans, and here's the thing: of all the thousands of jars that you're talking about at South Union, we have 6 that are known to exist. So these jars were either reused or broken or discarded. Talk about an item that is still out there somewhere. I think the great thing about the piece that you're talking about there is these production pieces, this technology that the Shakers created is almost completely gone. You read about it in our manuscripts at South Union and at Pleasant Hill, and these factories and these workshops where they had the very, very best of production material, and it's just gone. This is not the kind of thing that people were buying for their homes in these auctions in the 1920s. People wanted bureaus and beds and chairs, but this kind of stuff had no meaning. And so it's very fortunate that this has survived at Pleasant Hill, and again, a great treasure there.
Yeah, Milligan was described, we know he made furniture, but was also described at one point in Pleasant Hill's records as a machinist. So clearly, again, a handy person who could come up with something like this fruit slicing bench. And, I mean, I remember my mother occasionally making preserves in the summer. I don't think she was always thrilled to do it, but felt like she needed to. And that was like, what, maybe 12 jars? Just the scope of this industry, the pre-mechanization, this is as mechanized as it got as a fruit bench like this. That's pretty big. I think it speaks to clearly one of the great successes of the Shakers, not just in Kentucky, elsewhere, but was this communal labor force that you could, you'd have some specialists, but then you'd have labor force of men and women that you could move around to different things. So, well, thank you, Tommy, and happy to take any questions if there are any, or backtrack and look at another piece. Now, this exhibition, I can officially say, was supposed to close on March the 14th, but we're going to extend it out to April the 4th, just so we have the luxury of having these pieces a little bit longer. And again, my thanks to Tommy and the folks at Pleasant Hill for letting me rob their respective collections. Oh, and speaking of fruit preserves, one of the best things I was shown at Pleasant Hill in its own little box was a surviving jar of some kind of glass jar of some kind of fruit preserves from the late 19th century. So don't think I'd want to try it, but it's still out there.
A shaker exhibit has to have oval boxes to be a shaker exhibit.
Even though none of them are probably made in Kentucky. Right?
Yeah, that's the point.
So we we can start with this one, Tommy. You know, a great box, but with a great provenance and story behind it too.
We have no record of oval boxes being made at South Union, and maybe a tiny bit of evidence from Pleasant Hill, but nothing like what you see in other villages. However, both villages had oval boxes because at the auction at South Union, there were lots of oval boxes, and Pleasant Hill has been the same way. The one that you're seeing right here is very, very special. It is dated 1827 and has H. Freehart written under the lid. Hannah Freehart was an African-American shaker at South Union who came there with her mother and sister as enslaved people of the Eads family. And she and her mother and sister decided to stay there once they gained their freedom and lived there their entire life. So it's very special that she signed the underside of this great little cherry box that is part of the South Union collection.
And her sister Eunice was also wrote songs of faith. And as I recollect going through your hymn books, Tommy, that Hannah, who signed the box, was at least writing some of the tunes. I mean, I recall seeing some notational, not lyrics, but just notation that was attributed to her.
And all three women had positions of power in the community, worked in the trustee's office, helped run industries, helped teach. You know, it's an amazing story about the Freehart women at South Union.
And then next to that, we have this two pair of great big, I mean, good sized boxes. The blue one on to the left with the name of Nancy Moore stenciled on top, and the one on the right of Betsy Smith. And Tommy, you can tell us about Nancy and Betsy and how these boxes probably found their way to South Union.
Nancy Moore penned a journal during the Civil War that was subsequently published in the 1960s. So she's become very well known, kind of synonymous with South Union. But she was actually just the assistant eldress under Betsy Smith. Betsy Smith served longer at South Union than anyone in a leadership position. And she was a female, of course, much longer than any of the men in that community. In the early 1850s, Betsy and Nancy went to New England and New York on a trip to all the other Shaker villages. And we think these boxes were given to them as gifts at the time. They're known as presentation boxes, and the fact that they have their name emblazoned on the top. It's very significant that you're seeing these boxes in this showcase because as far as I know, they have never been together since the village closed at South Union in 1922. Nancy's box was donated by Julia Neal to the Kentucky Museum. Julia's family bought that box at the auction in 1922. Betsy's box was bought by our museum in the early 2000s. So one's been at South Union, one's been at the Kentucky Museum. So they are together at the Speed for the first time in 100 years. So it's very, very significant.